Good morning, conference. We will hear in the next few minutes evidence, moving evidence, I'm sure, about the criminalization of seekers of asylum, the proposed detention of children, and the cowardly dodging of responsibility for the global migration crisis this so-called illegal migration bill entails. Attacks not only on core liberal democrat values, but on the very foundation of our so-called Western values-based system, which the same Tory government invokes with such passion when it accuses other states of threatening it. But there is another reason why the proposed legislation is so incredibly dangerous. As former Vice Chair of the Human Rights Committee in the European Parliament, I share the view expressed by many, including most worryingly by the very same people who authored the illegal migration bill, that its provisions may well breach the European Convention on Human Rights. The letter is not EU legislation, it is an international treaty signed by the 47 member states of the Council of Europe and dating back to 1953. After the threat of a unilateral departure from the Withdrawal Treaty and the Northern Ireland Protocol, the government now declares that it is willing to breach another international agreement of even greater proportion. Whether or not the bill actually contravenes the ECHR or not is not the most troublesome issue here. It is the mere willingness of this ruthless anti-European government pandering to the far right to disregard fundamental universal human rights in favor of a national populist agenda. And for those of you who, like me, harbor dreams of ever rejoining the European Union, I can promise you that a country that repudiated the liberal values enshrined in the EU treaty and voluntarily left the even more basic European Convention will never be allowed back in. Nor will this government be able to make credible arguments about the torture of Ukrainian civilians at the hands of Russian war criminals, the suffering of women in Iran and Afghanistan, the plight of Uyghur detainees in Chinese concentration camps, or the terrible treatment of Latin American migrants in Trump's border camps. If this bill is passed, the UK will lose the last bit of moral high ground it ever occupied. I know you will today support this motion, and I plead with every one of you, in whatever capacity and by whatever means, to stop this horrendous and dangerous legislation. Thank you.
I now call Hannah Bettesworth and ask Leon Devine to stand by. Hannah is an ALDE Party Council member and Vice Chair of FERC, the International Committee.
Good morning, conference. I want to give you an example of what happens when these kind of policies are implemented in practice. I used to live in the city of Melilla at the border between Spain and Morocco. Recently, the Council of Europe Human Rights Commissioner has stated that there is no way in practice to enter Melilla and seek protection other than by swimming or by jumping the fence, and people also use small boats to try to do this. People have died in Melilla because of this. I was an interpreter with the Red Cross in the stay center where people arrive once they have had to cross the border in these traumatic ways, most commonly by having to jump over the fence. You cannot tell where these people have been or what their needs are by looking at them. If you could, you shouldn't be working for the Home Office for a start. People take these journeys in the full knowledge of the outcomes that could face them. Studies from Gambia in 2019 have shown that people both overestimate the risk of dying and the probability of getting a residence permit. So making these journeys dangerous does not stop people from taking them. The only solution is, as we see in Clause 2 of this motion, to have a system of making quick, fair decisions about residency. The backlog is both distressing to people who find themselves in this situation. What do you say when you've finished interpreting a session for young male migrants on health and social issues? And one of them says to you, "When can I leave and go to the Spanish Peninsula?" You have no answer to that because they are stuck in limbo. And it is really, really psychologically distressing to have to sit in that situation. And it also creates an artificial crisis with overcrowded centres and a failure either to grant asylum or to deal with claims that do not amount to requiring international protection. In summary, we need accessible ways to apply for humanitarian visas that people can make real and effective use of. And we need a well-funded decision-making system that gives people certainty about their application and that they will receive a fair hearing. This bill does neither of these things. It is not a realistic solution to the problem, and I ask you to pass this motion.
Thank you. I call Leon Devine from Bassett Law to speak and ask Jackie Bell to stand by. And Leon is speaking for the motion.
Conference. Many thanks to those who've proposed this motion. It's an issue that we must all be vocal about. An issue where we must be standing with those who are vulnerable, desperate, trafficked, and in need of our help. An issue that should not be being used as a political football. This Tory government is treading a very dangerous path, trying to use asylum seekers as scapegoats for the ills of our country that they themselves have created is nothing less than shameful. And the language used by Braverman and others in the last few weeks to promote these appalling proposals is beyond shameful. It is, by accident or design, leading to the possibility of hatred and othering directed at people fleeing wars, fleeing persecution and famine. It really is, as Michael Rosen pointed out earlier this week, reminiscent of the language used in the 1930s in Germany to help create the political climate that allowed National Socialism to take power. But this does not come out of the blue. The Tories are in a political hole. Their voters and their members are deserting them in numbers. They need issues which they can grab the headlines and pretend they are in control. One that they will appeal to, let's call it the Anderson tendency, in the red wall seats like mine in Bassett Law. This is a desperate attempt to use the issues around asylum seekers to take the headlines away from our failing economy, to obscure the mess the NHS is in, to deflect attention from the incompetent handling of so many issues. Will this bill help provide safe routes back for those fleeing for their lives to claim asylum in the UK? A claim that is their right? No, it won't. Will it help the thousands already here to have their claims processed quickly so they can start becoming productive members of our society? No, it won't. Will it stop the traffickers continuing to exploit these desperate people? No, it won't. Will it even stop the small boats trying to make the dangerous channel crossings? No, it won't. Conference. These proposals are the worst sort of political chicanery by an immoral, incompetent bunch of third-rate politicians desperate to hold on to power. We must oppose them. Please support the motion.
Thank you. I ask Ruvi Ziegler to stand by, and we come now to Jackie Bell, who's Vice Chair of Lib Dem Seekers of Sanctuary.
Conference. I was recently at Wannsee near Berlin. Above the peaceful lake stands a white villa where the Reich's final solution was agreed. The next day, I walked among the concrete slabs of the Holocaust Memorial, man's inhumanity to man. In the 30s, the British press warned of floods of German Jews entering the country. Fast forward to today, for Jews read migrants in small boats on the Channel. In both cases, people making desperate journeys from desperate situations, when leader Tim Farron made clear that people don't put their family in danger in a small boat at sea without just reason. For centuries, Britain had a reputation as refuge for those seeking sanctuary from persecution. It seems no more as the UK government brings forward increasingly hostile legislation that flies in the face of international convention. I'm a founder member and vice chair of Lib Dems for Seekers of Sanctuary. We work with our parliamentarians and NGOs to call for reform of systems and challenge public misinformation. Sadly, the right-wing media bolsters the actions of government. The myths are far from the reality of life as an asylum seeker. Even if you make it to shore, there can be detention, inability to work, limbo. Seekers of Sanctuary endorse this motion, which resembles one that was passed unanimously at Scottish Conference in Dundee last weekend. The government says they will deport those who don't come by legal routes, but for most, there aren't any. Some, including minors, may be trying to get to family already here, but find themselves in Rwanda with its poor human rights record and forever forbidden to come here. Suella and some of the media are in Rwanda at the moment. Perhaps they'd like to stay. Conference, we need to get the UK and Scottish governments working together, along with European partners, to find a humane solution. We need the British public to wake up, smell the coffee, and see the damaging direction in which the Conservative government is taking us. As Liberal Democrats, we must take a stand. Please support this important motion. And thanks to Alistair for bringing it forward here this weekend. Thank you.
Thank you. I ask Penelope James to stand by and call Dr. Ruvi Ziegler from Oxford East to speak.
Thank you very much, Conference. As an international refugee law scholar, I thought I saw it all, but this particular bill really shocks me. It really is an asylum ban. It extinguishes the right to seek refuge in the UK for anyone arriving irregularly, no matter how genuine and compelling their claim is. There is no consideration under this bill for individual circumstances. And as people mentioned, it is aptly named the illegal migration bill because the government itself says it may breach the ECHR. Indeed, I think it relishes that confrontation. But what it certainly breaches is international refugee law, because the question for international refugee law is not how you traveled, it is why you traveled. Most people who are fleeing persecution and conflict are unable to access passports and visas to travel to the UK illegally. There are simply no safe and legal routes. Why on earth would you pay a smuggler and risk your life to cross the most dangerous thoroughfare in the world, the Channel, if you could just board the Eurostar? Because you can't, because you will not get a visa to come to the UK if you're from one of those countries that Alistair has mentioned. And denying protection on this basis undermines the very basis of the 1951 Convention. Now, the horrors of this bill really include denying modern slavery victims protection, putting everyone in detention for 28 days without bail immediately, deporting children when they arrive at the age of 18, people like Mo Farah. So there are multiplicity of them, but ultimately the government knows it can adopt Lib Dem policy, which I was proud to move in March 2021, to create pathways to protection through humanitarian visas that can be applied for in consulate and embassies, in either transit countries, at border crossings, or indeed online. The government knows this because it has put in place a mechanism just last year to do this from people coming from Ukraine, and he's very proud of that, right? So humanitarian visas are not a panacea. The Home Office asylum system is rotten to the core, and it really needs a root and branch reform. But this cruel bill, which seeks essentially to solve the asylum backlog by one simple thing, Making all applications inadmissible will make it infinitely worse. It will leave asylum seekers in indefinite limbo whilst the government negotiates an agreement to return them to a place they've never been, they have no connection to, and which may not offer them protection. So conference, please adopt this motion and please send a very clear message that we say loud and clear that refugees are welcome here. Thank you.
I'll ask Cheney Payne to stand by, and I now call Penelope James, and it's Penelope's first Lib Dem conference. She's the newly appointed PPC for Dover.
Thank you. Conference. Dover has been in the news a great deal over recent years. With its iconic white cliffs, it is the gateway to Europe, or as the Home Secretary would have it, the gateway to billions of illegal migrants. Yes, it's true, we do experience influxes of asylum seekers. In the early 2000s, they came hidden in lorries or secreted underneath them. I have a friend who found a young man clinging to the underneath of her caravan. He only emerged when she got to Tunbridge, 60 miles from Dover, apologising profusely. Now they come in small boats. The crossing is only 20 miles or so. On a clear day, when standing on the cliffs of Dover, you feel as if you can reach out and touch the white cliffs of France on the other side. You can understand the desperation. Hope is within reach. This week, we've seen the 44th attempt by the Conservative government to tackle channel crossings, the illegal migration bill. The bill is not good news for those fleeing for their lives from persecution and abuse. It doesn't provide any new ways for safely processing asylum applications outside the UK, and it is effectively shutting down any chance of an appeals process. Essentially, it simply puts more power into the hands of the Home Secretary. My concerns are twofold. First of all, much focus is on stopping the boats, and so little appears to be on how we deal with the people smugglers who facilitate the boats. What is being done about them? Who is supplying the boats and the life jackets? I understand they are not sourced locally, but come mainly from Turkey. But how do they get to northern France? Far more investment and cooperation at international level needs to be focused on those who facilitate the crossings rather than on those fleeing persecution. And of course, we need grown-up, cross-border cooperation with France, which has been sadly lacking. Secondly, the repercussions of this bill will feed into our modern slavery problems, and I have not seen anything to mitigate this. Just a few months ago, we heard how several hundred children have gone missing from detention centres. This bill can only exacerbate this situation. I know that with climate change, migration is going to be an immensely difficult issue to deal with in the future. But this has to be done at an international level. The UK cannot do it alone. Conference, I hope that we will be at the forefront of speaking out very forcefully to immediately scrap this bill. An Iranian or Iraqi woman, an Eritrean or Syrian man fleeing persecution needs to be able to access and find asylum in a safe country. We should be one of these safe countries. Thank you.
I'll ask Gideon Amos to stand by, and I now call Councillor Cheney Payne, who's the newly appointed PPC for Cambridge, a Labour-facing seat.
Thank you. Good morning, Conference. This is my first conference since quite recently being selected as the PPC for Cambridge, which, as Belinda says, is a Labour-facing seat. And so in that sense, in some ways, it's been quite strange to arrive at a conference to be greeted by flying blue walls and Boris bubbles popping everywhere. And in our current political climate, where the dynamic in Cambridge has not changed at all since Julian Huppert lost his seat in 2015, people quite often ask me why. Why on earth are you and my fantastic team in Cambridge slogging it away in a Labour-facing seat when surely Labour, they're sort of the same as us. They're quite nice people. Conference, I'm here today to tell you that that is simply not true. They're not the same as us, and it's the policies and it's the beliefs and the values expressed in this motion which serve to me as a strong reminder of why the Liberal Democrats and Labour are not the same and why we urgently need more Liberal Democrats in Parliament. We expected the illegal immigration bill from the Conservatives. We expected that Rishi Sunak and Suella Braverman would want to stoke the culture war in their favour and to use the hostile environment to their advantage. We know that Suella Braverman, when she talks about stopping the small boats, doesn't even for a second pause to think about the people who they carry. But we didn't necessarily expect to see Labour treading the same turf. But disappointingly, when Keir Starmer challenged the government about this in Parliament the other week, he took them to task entirely on the basis that these plans won't work. And he raised issues and concerns around the government's failures to create effective, safe routes for policy around asylum seeking and immigration. Now, he's not wrong. This proposal will not work. They won't stop the boats, but that is so far from being the most egregious part of these proposals. This is not about whether the boats will stop, but about what will happen to the people for whom they are the only route to safety. Without safe and legal routes for refugees and asylum seekers to come to the UK, those fleeing war and disaster are left with no option than to be forced to take even more dangerous routes across the Channel and be offered no protection and support when they arrive. Making small boat crossings illegal will not make them stop. It will only make them all the more dangerous. As the Liberal Democrats, I believe everyone deserves to live in a free, fair and open society, and I believe that we here have a moral obligation to safeguard that by providing sanctuary to those fleeing persecution, war and violence. Someone needs to make the case for humanity, for compassion and for internationalism, and to not be frightened to stand up and say that just because a policy is popular, it doesn't necessarily make it right. Conference, this motion makes the case strongly for values which are inherently liberal. It is also the right thing to do. I urge you to support this motion.
I ask Noah Wilkinson to stand by and now call Gideon Amos, the PPC for Taunton Deane.
Conference, our liberal values are about freedom made strong by the rule of law and, of course, the natural order of the planet. So, of course, we support strongly safe routes for migrants and refugees to reach our shores. And we also, of course, support tough action against illegal immigration of the people smugglers. And the trouble with the government's attitude and policy is, in a desperate bid to appeal to the right, they failed to do both. And the real reason the Conservatives are raising this issue, of course, is to divert attention from a litany of failures. Their law-breaking, their failure to respect our institutions, their tax dodging, their failure to hold down inflation, their failure to sustain our economy, and their failure to deliver the kind of renewable energy which would see us all through the energy crisis a lot better than we are at the moment. They have some three-word slogans. I have some three-word slogans in advice to the Conservative MPs. Some of these will come as very new to Conservative MPs. Allow renewable energy. Reverse the NHS cuts. Respect our institutions. Stop breaking laws and pay your taxes. So if Alistair will take this fight to the Conservatives in Parliament, we're right behind him in the country. I will be taking that fight to the Conservatives in beautiful Taunton in Somerset. Come and help me, and come and help us finish the job we've started. Thank you, Conference.
Thank you. I ask Suzanne Fletcher to stand by and now call Noah Wilkinson. And Noah is from Sutton Coldfield and North Birmingham.
We need a new Prime Minister, we need a new government, and we need new laws. We must make sure Rishi Sunak does not stay true to his promise to stop the boats. Many refugees are sent back to unsafe environments or brought through the current asylum process. This process is unfair. Immigrants are given limited food and shelter, Their mental health is affected significantly. With an asylum process as slow and ineffective as this, immigrants are forced to take an illegal route to the UK. Last year, the government started a project in which they will send immigrants to Rwanda. Many refugees said they refused to go, but if they were forced, some said they would take their own life. Luckily for them, the Rwanda flight was cancelled. This does not mean it is over, as the illegal immigration bill continues to make it harder for refugees, when it is indeed the human traffickers at fault, not the refugees themselves. I want a world where people never have experiences like this. The only way we can do that is by changing the law, changing the government, and changing the Prime Minister. During the pandemic, the number of refugees detained has doubled. That means twice as many innocent people sent back to unsafe environments, twice as many families declined an opportunity for a better life. Do you think the world should be like that? Do you think families with young children should be declined safety, a basic human right? 60,000 Ukrainians have come into the UK since the war started. Why is it not the same for Syrians, Iranians, and people from other war-torn countries? All refugees deserve an even chance. Our party is all about making it fair for everyone, so let's make it fair for all refugees. Let's stop illegal immigration by providing a safe, legal route into the UK. Please vote for this motion.
I'll ask Tim Farron to stand by and call Suzanne Fletcher, who's Chair of Lib Dem Seekers of Sanctuary. Was.
This bill is illegal, and I can't emphasise that too much. Everyone has the right to claim, as Ruby has explained, under the 1951 Refugee Convention, that they are not illegal. Whether the claim is agreed or not is up to the decision made, but no person is illegal. And I've got to repeat it, no person is illegal. We have a leaflet about this on the LD4S stall, and I suggest you go and get one. We're appalled and sickened, but those affected are absolutely terrified. If someone's already in France, what do? It's taken months and years to get there. I've met someone who, as a young boy, left Afghanistan. It took him 2 years to get to France, to get to the UK, spending a long time in Calais. They've left in fear of their lives, often with relatives that are actually in the UK. But what are they supposed to do now? There should be safe and legal routes for such. I've heard a lot of discussion this weekend about the use of hotels for asylum seekers that have just arrived and the problems that it's causing. I just want to explain a bit that there's a lot of designated asylum accommodation, but the slowness of decision-making is causing a blockage. That's why people are in hotels. And it's the Home Office to blame for the chaos, not the asylum seekers. I know from experience when there was such a hostel in Stockton some time ago, thankfully not now. They don't inform the local authority, they don't know they're coming, they're not able to plan for education or other services. They don't inform the local voluntary sector to be able to help. They don't inform the community. All of this leads to chaos and upset. Add to that the whipping up of hatred in a hostile environment, no wonder you have situations such as in Knowsley, which are not only terrifying for the residents of that accommodation, but I can tell you it's worrying and very upsetting for asylum seekers elsewhere in the country. Add to this, there's no independent inspectorate as to what the conditions are, as there is in detention centres and prisons. So please, find out the facts, come along to the LD4S stall and get those. We need humanitarian visas. We need to campaign. Join with people like Together with Refugees, with the Orange Heart campaign. But treat all, whoever they are, however they got here, with dignity, fairness, respect, justice and humanity. Thank you.
Thank you, Suzanne. I now call Tim Farron from Westmoreland, Eden and Furness. He doesn't say he's a right-on his card, but if he's not, he should be.
Never managed that. Morning, everybody. It's been a really great debate. I hope you'll forgive me if I talk about Noah and say thank you, Noah. It was an absolutely outstanding speech, delivered beautifully. Very, very proud of you. This debate has been as decent and as evidence-based as the debate in Parliament from the Tory benches has been abhorrent and fact-free. Let's be clear, we do want to stop the boats because every crossing is a potential tragedy, but we will not stop those boats until, as Noah says, there are safe alternative routes so that crossing those treacherous waters will not seem to those desperate people the least awful option. You see, I am a patriot, so the despicable, cowardly language of our Home Secretary towards the most vulnerable people in the world is something that causes me shame. I am ashamed. Britain is not being swamped by refugees. How dare she? How dare she? 17 European countries take more refugees per head than we do. France takes 3 times more than we do. Germany takes 4 times more than we do. We are not being swamped, but our asylum system is overwhelmed all the same. It is being overwhelmed thanks to the wretched incompetence of this Conservative government, an incompetence which causes misery for people stuck rotting in hostels and hotels, often bewildered and frightened as the right-wing mobs jeer at them from the pavement outside. But there is something worse than that Tory incompetence, though. It is the vile and wicked choice they have made to blame their incompetence on those refugees who are the victims of that incompetence. What is also vile and wicked is the claim that asylum seekers head here to exploiters. I know that that is inexcusable garbage because I made many visits to the camps and to Calais to meet those people. When I speak to people there from Eritrea, from Iran, from Sudan, from Afghanistan, these people are not coming here to harm us, to sponge off us. They have never heard of the NHS. They have never heard of our benefit system. But there is something that they have heard of. They've heard of a Britain where you can be safe, a Britain where you can believe your beliefs, be who you are, raise your family, work hard, feed your family without fear, without the threat of death and persecution. That is why people head here, because they have heard of that Britain, this Britain. Britain whose reputation as a place of sanctuary has been built on centuries and centuries of that record. And I'll tell you this, it will take more than the wretched policies of this here today, gone tomorrow, wicked Tory government grubbing for votes in the gutter to dent that reputation, our reputation. So I'm going to shock you and tell you that the Lake District is not the most diverse part of the United Kingdom. And all the same, in August 1945, half of the children who had survived Auschwitz and the other death camps moved to Windermere, were welcomed in Windermere, rehabilitated and begun a new life in Windermere, because that is who we really are. That is the Britain that those people believe in. So, Ella Braverman, as you sport your Union Jack suitcase this morning from the steps of your plane in Rwanda, remember that Union Jack is ours too. This is our country, and we will uphold the values of that country. As she stands on the international stage, ripping up all of our responsibilities and our legal obligations, never mind our moral obligations. I want her to know, I want the world to know, she does not speak for me. She does not speak for you. She does not speak for Britain. So, I want to ask you something. I've spoken a couple of times this conference already, and I had to try to persuade you to do something that maybe you didn't want to do in the first place. Here, I have no doubt whatsoever we're on for a 100% vote this morning because you believe in the Britain I believe. So please pass this motion this morning and be the better Britain that those asylum seekers still believe exists. Thank you.
Thank you, Tim. We'll now proceed to a vote. I'll ask those online to please vote and be at their keyboards. And I'll ask in the hall, please, for a show of hands. Tim's put the pressure on there. Yep, that looks like it's unanimously carried in the hall, and we'll just wait a few seconds for those online to finish voting. Oh, indeedy. Sorry, this is my first time chairing, so thank you. Yes, I will ask for those events against the motion. And while we've got time to kill, I'll ask for abstentions. Okay, I can now say it's unanimous. Thank you. Hall. That's in the hall. We'll just wait for online because we have to collect the numbers even though we don't release them. Thank you. I'm delighted to tell you it is unanimous also online. So thank you. Thank you, everybody. Thank you very much to Councillor Darrell Smalley, my aide, and Paul McGarry, the aide in the hall. And we'll now be moving over to F17 and federal party reports. Thank you.
Good morning, conference. We now move on to our various party committee reports. Can I please ask those of you who are leaving to do so quickly and quietly? We want to stick to time. We've got a very packed agenda. Could I please ask those leaving to do so quickly and quietly? We now come on to our various reports, F17A through to D, starting with the Federal Board report, then the Federal Campaigns Elections Committee, Federal Council, and then the Campaign for Gender Balance. You can find this on pages 5 through to 9 in the conference daily. With that in mind, I would like to call Dr. Mark Pack, Party President, to move the Federal Board report.
Thank you, Nick. Many years ago, somebody gave me a tip about Federal Board and other Federal Committee reports, which is that generally things are going pretty well if people are leaving the hall at the beginning of a report, and you have to really worry when lots of people are coming into the hall to hear your report. But thank you, because I think this is an important part of our accountability in the party. And the point of a political party is to win power to be able to change people's lives. And your Federal Board's role in that is to make sure that we have a coherent and effective plan to implement the strategy that Conference passed earlier in this Parliament. And as the next Westminster general election polling day gets closer, there's a tricky balancing act that we need to navigate. The balancing act between the absolute importance of our held and target parliamentary seats, but also the importance of continuing a broader range recovery, winning elections at all levels all across the country. A balancing act, too, between the short-term imperative of the nearest, biggest looming polling day, but also the long-term need to continue to work to improve, for example, our record on diversity and inclusion, or to continue to invest long-term in improving our data and technology. And getting that balance right is tricky, but also important, because actually all of those different factors are mutually supportive. And I think it's particularly important to remember in that the more MPs we get elected, the stronger the party is across the whole country. More MPs means more resources. It means more opportunities in Parliament. It means more media coverage. It means more credibility, and therefore greater ability for us to win, for example, at council election level, both in the blue wall and outside of the blue wall. So to try and help get that all right, your board reviewed the sort of priorities we had inherited from the previous board, which are set out on page 11 of the printed reports booklet, and decided these are still the right organisational priorities for the second half of this Westminster Parliament. I should perhaps add that although our autumn conference was sadly cancelled, there was a full board report published for that, which is available on the party website still for any of you to look at. So the spring conference report is an update on things since the last autumn. I have very quickly 3 bits of additional news to add since the board report went to press. Firstly, and perhaps most importantly, really glad to be able to say that we've secured continued funding for Project Stella, which is our scheme to support the next generation of candidates from underrepresented ethnic groups. Secondly, the HQ team is looking at producing a new sort of what to say on the doorstep guide to pick up those questions that have come up through quite a lot of reports, and depending on time we might get to with this report as well, where people saying, well, what's the answer I should give if people say, what do the Lib Dems stand for, or how are you different from Labour, and so on. So watch out for news on that. And thirdly, we've welcomed to the board our newest member, Claire Hudson, who was elected last week as chair of the Federal People Development Committee, a former council group leader, former election agent, former MP's office staffer. Claire from the Southwest will add, I know, a really useful extra set of perspectives to all of the board's discussions. And finally, I should thank hugely the work of our HQ team, led so ably by Mike Dixon. It's become a little bit of a cliche for those of us who have been around in the party for a long time to call Mike the best chief executive of the party that we've had the pleasure of working with, but it's become a bit of a cliche because it is absolutely true. So huge thanks to Mike, all of our staff team, and indeed the other volunteers who help support the board's work in so many different ways. Now, in addition to the board report, I need to report to you changes to the complaints process, which are also set out in your reports booklet, page 14 in the printed edition. There are links there to before and after versions, so you can see the exact textual changes, and also we've included, as before, in response to feedback from people, an explanation of the changes as well as the exact wording of the changes being reported. I particularly wanted to pull out 2 changes that are included in there. One is a new right of appeal, so that if you submit a complaint and it's rejected at the sort of first stage of the process, that you'll have an opportunity for appeal in the circumstances set out in the booklet. And secondly, a change so that if you resign from the party, that doesn't automatically put a block on the complaint still being heard and processed. Some cases it might be appropriate, but in other cases it's not appropriate. The people can effectively veto the progress of a complaint by resigning from the party. And then finally, I have 3 names to recommend to you on behalf of the board to be added to the Federal Appeals Panel. Now, it's one of the inevitable circumstances that the board or members of the board like myself are almost always the subject of one or more open cases in front of the FAP. So it's a really important safeguard that we report to you, we recommend to you the names that we think should be added to the Federal Appeals Panel. And these names are based on having publicly advertised for the roles, having scored all of the applicants against a set of criteria. And if you approve those 3 names this morning, whose details are on page 23 of the printed report booklet, if you approve those names this morning, that will take us back up to 8 out of the 9 federal party appointed slots on the appeals panel being covered. And obviously very much hope we'll be able to fill the 9th slot at the autumn conference later this year. So I'd like to recommend those 3 Federal Appeals Panels names to you, to move the board report and to report those changes to the complaints process to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mark. As members will be aware from the conference daily, we've had a huge number of questions for all of our reports. We're going to be trying to take as many as we can within the time that we do have. Before we move on to the vote on the Federal Appeals Panel and potentially to accept the board report, we're going to answer a couple of the questions that have been submitted. So I think we're taking question 1 first, hopefully, Mark.
Yeah. Okay, so question 1 is about whether we'll see an end to Zoomocracy. I think the very fact that we're all here, or at least those of us who are here at conference in person, shows the value that so many of us put in in-person events. But we're also being joined this morning online by people because there is real value in online involvement as well. And in particular, I think the way a lot of party committee meetings have moved to being done online brings many benefits. It makes them more open to people to participate. If you have mobility issues or caring responsibilities, much easier, for example, to take part in it. Or indeed, if you happen to live a long way from where the meeting takes place. In all sorts of different ways, Zoom opens up the party to more people participating. It's also very often, particularly say for a national or federal committee meeting where people might otherwise be travelling from all around the country, it's a much more environmentally friendly option. And in a conference passed an amendment to our strategy motion a couple of years back about how we should move towards net zero in our internal party operations. And I think this is an important part of it. The pattern, I think, well, the pattern the board has adopted and seems to be pretty common across actually all federal committees and at many other levels at the moment, is to have, say, one in-person committee meeting a year, but then the other meetings through the year being virtual, which I think is a good balance. So I guess my direct answer to your question, Andrew, is I hope we're not going to see an end of meetings conducted by Zoom, but absolutely it needs to be part of a balance so that we get the best of both formats.
Thank you. Is Andrew here to ask a follow-up? Sorry, I should have asked him to come to the front for a follow-up. You have a maximum of 2 minutes.
Right, well, the main problem wasn't Zoom, it was Zoom-only meetings. For instance, I was excluded from the first AGM of the Westburn First and the Eden Party because it was Zoom-only. So I've no scrutiny, no comeback, and little from it. But my supplementary question, actually, is, are the federal board's concept of diversity is restricted to protected groups, or are they aware of things like digital exclusion and the elephant in the room, which is class?
No, absolutely, you're right that there are some circumstances where we talk about diversity, and that is essentially shorthand for the list of protected characteristics under the Equality Act. But there are other forms of diversity in the broader meaning of the word that are very important. And that's, in fact, I used an example of that in my initial answer to you, Andrew, about geography. That, it's really important that if you're a member in Scotland or in Wales, you are just as able to think that maybe I want to be taking part in a federal committee as if you are a member who lives in London a few minutes away from HQ. I know that I'm about 45 minutes travel from our HQ in London, and I'm immensely privileged and lucky in that respect. And we need to do our absolute best to open it up more widely. And we do have things like transport expenses policy and so on as well to also help deal, as much as we can within our limited resources, to the fact that people have very different abilities to, for example, pay for a train ticket to come to a meeting. But you're right, it's an area where we are far from perfect on and we need to continue to work at.
Thank you. Question 2 from Judith Bailey.
So Judith's question is about the changes to complaints paragraph 6.4b, which I'm reporting to you this morning, which are on page 18 of the printed booklet. And these changes would allow some complaints that go to our independent complaints process to be decided without I was going to say in-person, but mindful of Andrew's question, I should perhaps say an in-person or Zoom hearing, so just based on the written submissions. The reason for these changes is that it would speed up those complaints, the handling of them, by several weeks. And they're the sorts of complaints that often have a real degree of urgency about them because it's, for example, somebody who was in the middle of an election campaign decided to publicly support another party. And, there's a degree of urgency about what are we going to do, can we remove their Connect access, etc. But also, because those cases have a degree of urgency about them, they tend to queue jump quite reasonably and therefore push other cases back down the timetable. So the changes in what's being reported to you have 3 really important safeguards to them, which I hope will reassure Judith and all of you. One is that those decisions will still only be able to be made based on written submissions from both sides. So if somebody is, say, facing a complaint that's going to be decided this way, they will still get the chance to make a written submission. And in that, they can say, here is why I think there should be a panel hearing. Secondly, all of the rights of appeal that exist, and in fact will be strengthened in some ways by what's being reported here this morning, will still apply. So you'll still have a right of appeal. And thirdly, it's a maximum of about 1 in 20 cases, about 5–6% of cases that might qualify for the very sort of stringent definition of the sort of case that could go through this new process. So the vast majority of cases, on the vast majority of grounds where people might lodge a complaint, wouldn't qualify for this new process. So it's quite deliberately, quite tightly defined, with significant safeguards, but to help speed up the sorts of cases that, when they sadly do come up, often have a real degree of urgency about them.
Thank you. Do we have a follow-up from Judith? No? Okay, we're going to next come to questions 3, 4 and 5 from Lucas North. Mark Pack.
Thank you. So yes, if it's okay, I'll answer these 3 together because I think there are some common themes through them. And I think the thing that underlies a lot of this is the historic problem we've got that a lot of the parties' IT systems are designed to work for local parties and to support local party activity rather than having been designed to also support the work of affiliated organisations. And so historically, affiliated organisations have had to have their own IT systems and not been able to share and integrate data and so on. And that is something we're changing. And I hope many of you have noticed, for example, the new online event system with Event Cube. That's available for affiliated organisations to use just as much as local parties. But changing, but not yet perfect in having changed everything. Taking Lucas's issue about Lighthouse, you're right that Lighthouse should be available to young Liberals to manage their membership. The issue at the moment is that YLs have access to Lighthouse, but not all of the user interface has yet been built to allow all of the things that YLs, or indeed other affiliated organisations, would need to do to manage their membership through Lighthouse. I checked with the HQ team this morning on the latest state of play on that, and that work sadly got a little bit delayed because of all the emphasis on migrating our websites and our email systems over to Fleet and targeted email. But the HQ team are hoping to be able to return to finishing off that work in the very near future. And the good news is that work will benefit not just YLs, but all affiliated organisations. And then finally, on the issue about Connect, this comes back to what I said earlier, is that the problem we have with Connect is that its core permissions and security structures are based on geography and the local party structure. And so we just don't have a way, without very expensive re-engineering work, to enable other party bodies that don't fit that geographic and local party structure to be able to use Connect in the way that YLs would wish to. So I'm sorry that it's a slightly downbeat answer on that one, but absolutely, I'm keen, and I know the HQ team and the rest of the board are keen, to try to continue to find ways so that we can provide better support to affiliated organisations, because you're a really important part of the Liberal Democrat family, and we do need to, as fast as we can within our frustratingly limited resources, move away from that historic situation of party IT really only being there for local parties. Local parties are vital, but so too are affiliated organisations.
Thank you, Mark. Lucas, do you have a follow-up? You have a maximum of 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mark, and thank you for that answer. I really do appreciate you engaging with us, and I know you've engaged with us previously on this as well. I guess I just want to pick up the Connect point, and especially around our new website, because with Nation Builder, we used to be able to run petitions and forms, and we often would around Freshers season, for example, and we would often actually be the first point of entry where we find out that a member is moved, for example, which is useful data for the party to collect as well. I know, and you might be aware, that at this conference there's someone currently organising an auction for a t-shirt that says something like, "I've never lost a conference vote to Gareth Epps," and that person's also taking in expressions of interest for people who might want a printed version of that. If YL wanted to run a similar Register Your Interest campaign, we currently can't do that with the tools we have available. Appreciate it might not be through Connect, but is there a plan to look at other platforms that we might be able to use, or other ways that we might be able to address this? For example, giving YL access to Connect at the federal level if we can't have it specifically at the Young Liberals level.
So at the moment there isn't, but showing the value of conference questions, I absolutely will follow up with you on that if that's okay after conference to see what we can do. Because in particular, I think one of the huge potential benefits of either YLs or, for example, Plus Liberal Democrats being able to make more and better use of our IT systems is, I just use those as both examples of bits of the party that come into contact with a lot of members of the public and have got lots of campaigning opportunities with them. And we absolutely want that if somebody really likes stuff that Plus is doing and backs their campaign or comes to a YL, say, stall at a university event, for that email address and that contact data to be able to be used to follow up, to recruit them to the party, to be able to be, used by the local party wherever they live to see if they want to get more involved in the party in other ways, because partly that will make the party more diverse as well as bigger and stronger. So yes, I'll very happily will follow up with you, if that's okay, Lucas, after conference to see if there are workarounds we can figure out. And I should just say thank you hugely to YLs for producing the conference app, because I think that has been really good example of making the best use of technical skills, so thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Mark. Unfortunately, we are very tight on time, so any other questions submitted to the Federal Board report will receive a response in writing, which we will publish. Okay, we come now to a series of votes for the online voting only. At the moment, I'm opening the voting for the Federal Appeals Panel members, and that will run all three names at the same time. We have 3 nominated members of the Appeals Panel to vote on. I will take those votes in turn in the auditorium. So could I please see all cards in favour of Laura Coyle? Please raise your cards. And all those against? Thank you. Can I see all cards in favour of Bridget Fox? To become an FAP member, obviously, not just in favour of Bridget. Thank you. And all those against? Okie dokie. And all those in favour of Neil Stockley to join the FAP? And all those against? Thank you. Bear with us just a moment while we check the online. All 3 have been chosen as FAP members. Thank you very much. We now come to the vote on the board report. So all those in favour, all those for accepting the board report? Sorry, and all those against? Okay, and bear with us one moment whilst we allow the online voting to catch up. And that has been accepted. Thank you very much, Mark. We now come on to the Federal Campaigns and Election Committee. I welcome Baroness Kath Pinnock. I'm really sorry about that. I have no idea what I was thinking. I just completely name blank. Just Baroness Kath is what I've been calling you on my papers. And it's the first time the Federal Campaigns Elections Committee is reporting to conference. Over to you.
Oh, right, no worries about that then. So my report is not the longest you've ever seen because I was elected put into the chair in January this year. So I've had 2 and a bit months of chairing this very, very important committee. First of all, I do want to record my thanks and those of the committee to Lisa Smart, who was our previous chair, who, as you know, is a key target candidate in Hazel Grove and thought her time was best spent winning that seat. What we do is oversee, scrutinise and decide issues of election campaigns and, importantly also, the communications element of the party. So, for example, we have heard in our meeting in January about the, I thought, superb campaign that our communications team ran over the Christmas period when they, because of their long planning cycle, they started planning for the Christmas communications campaign to get into the media, main written press, online and social media in September. And they were hugely successful in achieving a great number of hits in the main media, even some of the right-wing media, but nevertheless, that's good because it gets the Lib Dem message out. And so we hear from them and make sure that they're on track doing what they need to do, which is make sure we get a positive, proactive and campaigning message where it needs to go. And they're working much more closely with our target seats to help them get their media coverage that they need. So that's fairly more, let's say more developed than it had been. Then on to the campaigns element of, and elections element of what we do. So we hear regularly, well, every meeting, from the Director of Campaigns, Dave McCobb, about how well our advanced seats and moving forward seats are doing in terms of their activity and the how well that they are being received on the doorstep. We also, and as a local councillor of many years, this is important to me, have a real good think about elections everywhere in the country, including local elections where we work closely with our colleagues in ALDC. And a member of the ALDC is a member of our committee. And you will, I hope, know that one of the key efforts that we have been making as a committee in combination with campaigns and communications teams in HQ is to try and improve the number of candidates that we stand in the elections in May. And that has been a very focused, determined campaign. Local parties will have had a booklet from the campaigns team encouraging them on how to find candidates and get candidates to stand as paper-free candidates. Local parties are being phoned to try and give them that encouragement and support that they might need in, you know, fight everywhere. Everywhere, people deserve to have a Lib Dem to vote for. And the more we can do that, the bigger this party will grow and the more relevant it will be in every part of the country. So that's a brief report from me because I have briefly been chair.
Thank you very much, Kath, for that. We are really running very close to time, unfortunately, in this section. I'm going to take one question and, unfortunately, no follow-up. All of the questions will be...
Sorry if I've gone on too long.
You haven't gone on too long.
Right.
Yes, we've had more questions than we were expecting. So I'm going to ask you to answer question 7, please, which is what are you doing to ensure campaigns and messaging is relevant to Labour-facing areas as well as the blue seat?
As somebody who is in West Yorkshire, as a councillor, who fights Labour every election for the last 30-plus years, I can assure you it's very close to my heart. As I've previously said, one of our focused activities is going to be to try and up our activity everywhere in the country. And that must include Labour-facing areas. And you will see in coming months, I think, that our messaging will, and even from Ed today, that our messaging will be directed to Labour councillors, where the councils and councillors are failing their communities. We need, as Liberal Democrats, to take them on. We need, as Liberal Democrats, to fight for those folk and get them a better deal. So rest assured, John, wherever he is, that we will be, because it's close to my heart, and we're not going to let them get off the hook.
Thank you very much. Okay, we're going to move to a vote on whether to accept the report of the FCEC. So can I see all cards in favour of accepting the report? Thank you very much. And all cards for not accepting the report?
Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much. That's been carried. That accepted the report. Moving swiftly on to the Federal Council report, I'd like to call Anthony Hook to the stage. This is also the first time the Federal Council is now reporting to conference, and I'd like you to move the report, please.
Thank you very much, Nick. It's the first time we're reporting because the Federal Council is a brand new committee created this year. It consists of 40 members elected from across all parts of the party, and it's my honour to be the first chair. Our role is to scrutinise the Federal Party, in particular the Federal Board, and our aim is to do that in order to contribute to the party's success. So far this year we've had 3 meetings, each coming after a Federal Board meeting. After every Federal Board meeting we receive within 3 working days a copy of all of its papers and its decisions, and we then have 5 days for our call-in process. That leads to a Federal Council meeting being approximately every 11 days after each board meeting. This conference has given the Council particular powers, which is, as I mentioned, the power to call in. It takes 13 members of the Council to decide to call in a matter, and then it takes 27 members of the Council, if we wish to do so, to overturn a decision of the Federal Board. Of course, the call-in process is not the only way in which we will be seeking to scrutinise what's being done and get better for our party members and all the people who rely on the party. We've enjoyed so far extremely positive engagement from the President and other members of the Federal Board, and we will, as well as calling in, seek over the course of the year to have regular exchanges of views with them and other key people in the party about what's happening and what can be better. In June, the Vice President, Amna Ahmed, who is in charge of Equality, Diversity and Inclusion, will be coming to see us, and in October, the party leader will be coming to see us. I'm particularly grateful. At our first meeting, we had an excellent training session from Lisa Smart, who was able to, using her extensive experience of scrutiny in local government, talk to all of the members of the Federal Board about Federal Council, about what effective scrutiny means and how we can do that, to ask the right questions, to pull on the threads, to discover things and to make constructive suggestions. So far, we've had a robust exchange of views, a very constructive discussion with the President and the Vice Chair of the Federal Board about the party's messaging and narrative. We've been promised, we've been listened to, and that will be reflected, we're told, in the leader's speech this afternoon, which we shall listen to with interest. We've also had, at our last meeting, a very full discussion about equality, diversity and inclusion, and we're in the course of developing a comprehensive work plan for the whole of the calendar year and beyond to make sure we're addressing the things that really matter and will make this party more successful. Our aim as the Federal Council is not to rock boats for the sake of it. Our aim is to make sure all of the boats are moving as effectively as they can in the right direction, and we'll be doing that with vigour. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anthony. We come to question 1, which is, after the first few months of full operation, how does the Federal Council see its role developing over the rest of the first term?
Thanks, John, very much for your question. I see our role developing in this way. First of all, we have to follow closely and respond to what the board does. So we examine its decisions very carefully and then present alternatives to ask for explanations where things are unclear to us. But I think our focus will be very much on the things that matter most to this party's success, if I borrow Joe Grimmon's phrase, to go towards the sounds of gunfire. And obviously, we're a year away from an incredibly important general election, so I think that will be at the fore of our minds a lot of the time.
Thank you very much. Okay, so we move on to a vote whether to accept the report of the Federal Council. Could I please see all cards in favour? Thank you very much. And all those against? Excellent. That is carried. Thank you very much, Anthony. We now move on to the report of the Campaign for Gender Balance. I'd like to call Julia Cambridge to the stage to move the report.
Well, good morning, Conference. I am presenting this on behalf of myself, my fellow Vice Chair Vicky Slade and our Chair Candy Pearcey. So the Campaign for Gender Balance has continued to provide support to women who want to become members of Parliament, at the Westminster Parliament, the Scottish Parliament and, it's very dry. I'm fine, Nick, I think. And the Welsh Assembly over the last 6 months. We'd like to pay tribute to our wonderful team of volunteers who help and support women candidates across the UK. Our team has been providing mentoring support for women for approval and parliamentary selections. Thank you very much, Duncan. The target seat selections were very challenging this year, and there were a number of notable, successful women candidates. As Vice Chair, I have led our candidate approval team to success, helping many women get approved as parliamentary candidates. We're very proud of supporting women candidates with a range of different protected characteristics. Our commitment to supporting intersectionality is one of the CGB defining factors. CGB Chair Candy Pearcey has led a team providing support to women applying for selection in specific seats. We're very happy with the overall success rate, and some excellent women have been selected. However, we're concerned that it seems to be getting harder for candidates to be selected when they don't live in the seat they are applying for. Another factor making it harder for women and other candidates with diverse characteristics is the timing. When all the target seats are up for selection at the same time, this causes problems. It limits the options for diverse candidates to gain experience that they need of a selection battle in order to win a selection in a seat which has strong prospects. But the good news is that many women have been coming forward for approval since Christmas 2022. Many more women who've got involved in politics because of their experience during the pandemic are now setting out on their political journeys. As a result, we're running a Future Women MP webinar weekend on the 1st and 2nd of April. And please, if there is anybody here today who wants to join that online event over 2 days, then please do contact CGB. We've had great feedback on this. We've had past events that have been very successful, and we look forward to moving forward a new cohort of successful women to be selected and stand for Parliament as a result of that training. We had a full programme of training modules planned for autumn conference, but of course we know that that was cancelled due to the death of the late Queen. Now this was a big blow to the continuity of CGB training. Unfortunately, the conference hotel at York has limited space, so we've only been able to run 3 training sessions this year. However, we're looking forward to very active times supporting excellent women for approval and selection in the coming year. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Julia. We're going to take a question submitted by Hina Bokhari, which is number 7, which is what support or training will be provided for women from ethnic minorities to become PPCs and counsellors?
Okay, well, thank you, Hina. That is the question of our time. I think even within training for women, there is a vacuum, there is diversity within diversity, and we are very cognizant and aware of this. What have we done about it? Well, for instance, I've just mentioned the Future Women MP weekend on the 1st and 2nd of April. Ethnic minority women candidates will have reserved spaces on that weekend. We are limited for numbers, even though it is an online event. How are we going to get those ethnic minority women to want to do that? Well, we're looking to our structures. I had some very informative conversations with the Young Liberals this morning. We have our diversity officers on our boards up and down the country. And we are saying, go out there, encourage women from diverse backgrounds and ethnic minority women. I'm looking at you, Daisy Cooper, who's a champion of this. Please encourage those women to come forward. You know, be like Daisy. We need to have them on our Future Women MP weekend, and then we can provide the training, the support, and the mentoring, and help them on that journey.
Thank you very much, Julia. I'm not going to allow a follow-up as we are pressed for time. As I mentioned in my report yesterday, and the additional questions we've received, we've now hit around about 150 questions to various party bodies and committees, and we'll be aiming to respond to everyone in writing as soon as we can. Therefore, I would like to move to a vote to accept, the vote on accepting the report for the Campaign for Gender Balance. Those in favour of accepting the report? And those not in favour? Thank you very much. That has been accepted. Thank you very much, Julia. I'd like to thank my aides, Duncan Brack and Chris Mains. Next, we're moving on to F18, A More Caring Society.
Good morning, Conference. So we now move to motion F18, which you can find on page 95 of the agenda. There is one drafted in amendment and there are 2 amendments being moved. Could I ask speakers to keep to time? We have got more cards than we're able to call, so the quicker you are, the more we can get in. Could I ask Munira Wilson to stand by, and I now call Daisy Cooper to move the motion.
Bit sleepy, aren't we? Morning, everyone. Conference, let me start by thanking the working group that has done a phenomenal amount of work, taking evidence, putting together a policy paper and this motion today. It won't surprise you to know that, like every other bit of our health and care service, the social care system is in crisis. Just last year, 500,000 people in England were waiting for care, many stranded in hospital beds due to the lack of space in care homes or because they couldn't be discharged home because there was no one to look after them. It is simply heartbreaking that millions of older and vulnerable people across the country are struggling to get the care that they need and deserve. And as we all saw far too clearly this winter, it's hitting our NHS as well, because if you can't get people out of hospital, you can't get people into hospital. And that's why we ended up with overflowing A&Es and queues of ambulances in hospital car parks. We know that this is not NHS inefficiency. It is not bad NHS management. It's not the COVID-19 pandemic either, as the Conservatives might want you to believe. The simple truth is that the system was struggling long before we had even heard of COVID, and the Conservatives do not have the will to fix a system that is not functioning as it should. Now, of course, that didn't stop one Boris Johnson, did it? Standing on the steps of Downing Street, claiming in 2019 that he was going to fix the crisis in our social care once and for all. He promised to fix social care once and for all. He promised that nobody would have to sell their house to pay for care. And he promised he would not raise taxes to do it. It came as a surprise to absolutely nobody that he broke all of those promises. Now, Boris Johnson may be gone, not as long gone as I would like, but not much has changed since he left. In many ways, Rishi Sunak is a fitting heir to Boris Johnson, because the reforms that his party has brought forward have been delayed again and again under his command. And even if Sunak brought them forward tomorrow, they would come nowhere close to solving the crisis. The Conservative Party's abortive attempts to raise tax to pay for their inadequate reforms would have hit low earners and the young the hardest, just when they are struggling the most. The Conservatives have let our country down for long enough. They've had their chance to reform social care, and they've failed. That's why we're putting forward our plan to fix social care. Today, our party, the Liberal Democrats, are setting out a comprehensive policy to reform social care so that older and vulnerable people can get the care that they need. Conference, I am unbelievably proud to announce that we will start this policy by introducing free personal care. Under our plan, no one, whether in a care home or in their own home, would have to pay for their day-to-day care. Needs such as giving them help with washing, taking medication, and getting dressed would be covered in full. This would make people free. It would give them the freedom from fear of catastrophic care costs, an end for any need to sell their home or possessions to pay for essential care, and it would make the whole system far fairer than it is today. Families would no longer be hit with care costs that they cannot reasonably be expected to afford, as they are expected to do so under this Conservative government. But Conference, this is not enough. I have no doubt that you will agree with me when I say that although our reforms are critical, they will all be for nothing without a proper package of support and pay for our hard-working care workers. Now, I have seen firsthand the incredible work that care workers do, day in and day out. It is a skilled and crucial job. It should be recognised as such and be paid to match. We've already set out our plan to pay all care workers a proper wage by introducing a carer's minimum wage. We made it clear that paying those working in social care a higher wage is the first step towards preventing the exodus of workers from the sector and to providing better care for those who need it. And that's why, in this paper, we go even further than our minimum wage for carers. Today, we are setting out our plan to introduce a range of financial benefits, training and workplace rights for carers so that they get the support that they deserve. And it's not just for paid carers. We are also putting forward a set of measures to help the 10.6 million unpaid carers in the UK. Now, Wendy Chamberlain's fantastic bill that she's currently pushing through Parliament will ensure that carers get a right to time off work to care for their loved ones. We would go even further than that and introduce far more support for unpaid carers. In this paper, we set out how the Liberal Democrats will raise the carers' allowance. We will raise the carer premium. We will raise the carer addition and the carer element of universal credit by £20 a week each to help carers manage the cost of living crisis. And we'd apply a triple lock to the carers allowance so that carers don't get left behind by inflation, as the Conservatives have allowed to happen. Conference, proper reform of social care is one of the biggest challenges facing the UK right now. And shockingly, the Conservative government has no real plan to fix it. We Liberal Democrats do have a plan, and we believe that this situation as it currently is cannot be allowed to continue. Conference, I urge you to support this motion. I also urge you to vote to include my colleague Munira Wilson's fantastic amendment on kinship carers, as well as the amendment from the North West Regional Party. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Daisy. Could I ask Andrew Haldane to stand by? And I now call Munira Wilson to move Amendment 1.
Good morning, Conference. Thank you. April, not her real name, is a constituent of mine. Her sister was dying from bladder cancer. Before she passed away, she asked April if she would look after her 5-year-old nephew. Of course, April said yes. She would do anything to protect him. It's a decision that April has never regretted. Yet it came at a huge financial and personal cost. Her nephew had trauma and developmental delays, so she asked the council to pay for his therapy. You did the right thing, the council said, in taking in your nephew before social services got involved. But this is now a private arrangement, so we have no duty to help you. Had April not stepped up, her nephew would have ended up in local authority care. Yet because she did the right thing, she got almost nothing to help pay for his living costs or to manage his mental ill health. April is not the only one. Currently, 150,000 children are being raised by kinship carers, such as grandparents, aunts, uncles, siblings, and family friends. Yet they receive a fraction of the support that foster carers and adoptive parents receive. But the benefits to children of living with friends and relatives they already know and trust are immense. Compared to care leavers, they're more likely to have better mental health, they're more likely to have better exam results, and they're more likely to hold down a job. The government is taking the love that these carers provide for granted. Their recent children's social care strategy allocated just a fraction of the funding that their own independent advisor said was necessary. Conference, I believe every child deserves a good start in life. That's why last summer I introduced a bill in Parliament with proposals to step up the support that kinship carers received. Proposals that I'm asking you to support today. All kinship carers should receive weekly payments equal to the allowance that foster carers receive. Kinship carers should be entitled to time off work when they welcome in a child, just as when a family adopts a child. And children in kinship care should have the same support at school that looked after children get, such as access to the pupil premium. Conference, under Ed Davey's leadership, Liberal Democrats have been the party that has stood up for carers of all kinds, as Daisy has already said, whether that's by leading the campaign to increase carers' allowance or Wendy Chamberlain's Carers Leave Bill, that it will soon become law. And this motion goes even further. Amendment 1 builds on this, looking at how to support one group of carers within the children's social care system. For Ed, this is personal. He's spoken movingly in the past of his amazing Nana and Grandad, who took him in after his mother passed away. And I know for many others in our Lib Dem family, they have similar stories to share. But it's also the right thing to do. The government cannot afford not to support kinship carers. If we do nothing, there will be 100,000 more children in care in a decade's time, costing us £5 billion more than it does now. Yet giving a kinship carer access to a social worker and an allowance costs about half as much as it does for a child to go into local authority care. Conference, for most kinship carers, welcoming in a child is a life-changing decision, but one they would make again in a heartbeat. We owe it to them and the children that they care for to give them the support they need to flourish. Conference, let's step up for kinship carers. Please support Amendment 1 and the motion as a whole.
Could Wendy Taylor please stand by? And I now call Andrew Haldane, who will be moving Amendment 2.
Thank you, Conference. I'd like to commend the people who are involved in the working group and those involved in drafting the motion on an absolutely excellent piece of work. I think it's a very impressive piece of policy that we've got here before us. I'd also like to thank FCC for incorporating part of our original amendment as a drafting amendment. Conference, this is an unusual and quite short amendment, because if you look carefully in the policy paper, you will find it there. We felt that it deserved highlighting as part of the text of the motion, because it, along with most of what else is in the motion, it's those aspects of the policy paper that you as local activists can campaign on, and those of you who are local authority members may have a chance to influence. Local commissioning partnerships are emerging across the country more by default than by action by the government, and they're beginning to influence what can happen at this important transition between hospital and care. There can be disputes over exact figures, but we've roughly had about 12,000 acute care beds occupied by people whose hospital care has been complete, and they're only there because there isn't a suitable care package for them. This is a dreadful thing for those people involved, because the more time they spend in an acute bed, the chances of their recovering from their frailty reduces. It's not good for them. It's not good for anybody. And of course, it causes all the dreadful consequences in emergency departments and ambulance queues while people wait for those beds. The importance of having somewhere where there's just a transitional short care stay point where most people will pass through on their way back into independence in their own homes with appropriate care support. It provides a concentrated place where convalescence and rehabilitation can take place. I know that in many hospital wards where there are frail people who shouldn't be there, there's a great effort to keep them moving, to keep their muscles going, to provide some physiotherapy, but it's the wrong place to do it. We need a special location where that can take place. Conference, the reason that this might be achievable by those of you who are working at local level is because it could be cost effective for those who care more about the money than the people. There is an option here to save money on expensive acute hospital care beds that are no good to their occupants and provide alternative facilities at a lower cost that are much better for them. We're also, as part of this paper, hoping to increase the status of care workers and give them opportunities to develop their skills. These locations are ideal. This transitional point is a great place for care workers to increase their skills, for doctors and nurses to get more experience of dealing with frail people as part of their training. Conference, I commend the amendment to you, and I also commend Amendment 1 and the motion of a whole. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Andrew. Can I ask Lee Darg to stand by, and I now call Dr. Wendy Taylor.
Conference. As a long-term councillor and as chair of Newcastle Health and Social Care Scrutiny Committee, I'm well aware of the dire situation with social care services in the UK and the deplorable failure of the Tory government over many years to tackle the issues. failing to implement the provisions of the Care Act, kicking fair funding for the social care into the long grass, and failing to integrate health and social care. And of course, the issues have been made far worse by COVID and by the loss of thousands upon thousands of health and social care workers due to Brexit. So I'm glad to see this excellent paper and the motion and the excellent suggestions within it, how we want to tackle this. But I want to concentrate on the role of the voluntary and community sector, who are facing a perfect storm of challenges at present. If we want to keep more people in their own homes, or at least in their own communities, we need the voluntary and community sector to play a bigger part in supporting our residents. VCSE organisations are doing their best to focus on the provision of basic essentials, food, clothing, warmth, access to digital services and technology, and crisis support. But unfortunately, there's been a drop in the number of people volunteering for a variety of reasons, including people needing to work more hours or help with family childcare, so less time to volunteer, and people not wanting to claim much needed travel expenses out of a sense of pride. In addition, the VCSE sector has seen the impact of an increased severity and complexity of mental health issues amongst service users, staff and volunteers. This has meant many staff and volunteers have been unavailable due to sickness and isolation periods. The voluntary and community sector plays a vital role in supporting more people who are more vulnerable, less likely to access mainstream services, and who have multiple and complex needs. They are a vital partner in improving the lives of residents in the communities in which they work, and the sustainability of these services is essential if the inequalities gap is not to widen further, and if our ambitions on community support are to be met. Longer-term and core funding is needed, and I do hope that there is a plan for this to be included in our policy. Conference, I urge you to support the whole motion and amendments 1 and 2. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Wendy. Could I ask Lisa Smart to stand by, and I now call Lee Darg.
Good morning, Conference. So many smiling faces after Glee Club and whiskey tasting and wine, and so good morning to you all. A special thank you to Daisy and Manira for your continued work, and Wendy, as we've heard, and our Lord's team as well, and particularly this policy working group who, as Andrew mentioned earlier, really have produced a fantastic paper, which you can read in addition to the motion itself. And I also want to pay particular thanks to Andrew and also his colleague Jim Pilling, two members of the North West region who some time ago now decided that social care was important and we needed to do something about it in this party. So they used the power of their regional conference to put a motion together, and a long journey ahead we see ourselves here today with this fantastic motion to hopefully go into our next manifesto. So if you think that going to a regional conference doesn't have power, it does, so please make sure you use it. The Tories have long stopped pretending to care, so it's no wonder that social care is not important to them. Labour's most recent comments suggest there might be an economic case for social care to be looked into. Well, we here today, as Liberals and Liberal Democrats, have to do the heavy lifting again, and that's what we've done here with this paper. So along with the main motion, I heartily recommend the 2 amendments as well, so please vote for them all as a package. I'll close on saying Happy Mother's Day to my mum, who unfortunately is no longer with us. She died some time ago. And near the end, we were introduced as a family. My dad himself, in his 70s, with many health conditions, became effectively an unpaid carer at home. We were introduced to the horrors of the current system. Phone lines that went nowhere. Phone lines that were open, but only if your care needs were on Monday to Friday from 9 till 5. Phone lines that ended up with people who perhaps tried to do what they could, but had few people in, few people available to help. And even less equipment and tools that they needed as well. It's absolutely vital in this country, for the reasons laid out as well, with ambulance delays, which are caused largely because we don't have social care, more community care, which is also touched upon this motion, and rightfully as well, the retention as well as recruitment of staff, which is something that our party is talking about, but I'm not hearing from Tory and Labour. You can recruit as many people as you like, but if you can't retain them and look after the staff properly, which this paper again calls to do, then we're not going to have a social care fit for our country. So please support the motion and the amendments, and let's make sure that it's Liberal Democrats once again leading the way on such an important issue. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lee. Could I ask Peter Lacey to stand by? And I now call Lisa Smart.
Thanks very much, Morning Conference. When Liberals talk about care and social care, what we're really talking about is power. It's about who has it and, really importantly, who doesn't. And there's a lot to send my Lib Dem heart soaring in this motion. There's a call to move to a much more preventative approach, a call for real support for paid and unpaid carers. But I'm going to concentrate on lines 24 to 26. As we know, as Liberals and as Liberal Democrats, that when people have power over their own lives and they have power over their own care, that they're most able to thrive. Now, we've had lots of speakers here over the weekend listing from the platform the many and varied ways in which the Conservatives have spectacularly and shamefully failed our country, and particularly the most vulnerable. But it is none so obvious in failing to deliver on their reforms to social care and failing to protect and stand up for the most vulnerable in our society. Now, I'm a councillor in the finest borough in the land, in Stockport, and it would be remiss of me as a councillor not to give a particular mention to the repeated failure of this Conservative government to deliver a multi-year settlement for local government. Because what that does is it makes long-term planning around care, which is about half of our budget, social care for adults and children, it makes it nigh on impossible. I saw mentioned at the end of this week, the Health Service Journal mentioned that the Conservatives are now backtracking on their promises of spending £500 million on workforce retention and workforce development that they mentioned in the 2021 white paper, and it is just repeatedly shameful. We as Lib Dems know that when you fix social care, that is the Liberal answer to how you tackle the NHS crisis. It's both the right thing to do morally and economically. Now, I'm lucky enough to chair Stockport's Valuing People Partnership Board, and that brings together everybody working in the field of learning disability locally. And I'm particularly delighted when we're joined by the Speaking Out Group. Speaking Out Group is a group of adults with a learning disability, and we talk about the issues that are faced. And the theme that comes through again and again from the members of the Speaking Out Group is how they want to say about what goes on in their lives, who they live with, where they live, who comes to work in a supported tenancy. It is right and proper and deeply liberal to push for people to have power over their own lives. Please support the motion and the 2 amendments. If you want to see the difference Lib Dems can make when we get a say in how this country is run, it's right here in this motion. Thanks, Conference.
Thank you very much, Lisa. Could I ask Imogen Shepherd-Debay to stand by? And I now call Peter Lacey.
Thank you. Good morning, Conference. When you last met 3.5 years ago, my getting involved in party politics wasn't even a twinkle in anyone's eye. But the government's handling of the pandemic changed that. So I want to thank the Harrogate and Knaresborough Party and the now greatly expanded group of North Yorkshire councillors, Lib Dem councillors, for welcoming me and making me feel so much at home. And I look forward to Tom Gordon, our new PPC, bringing Harrogate and Knaresborough back to the Lib Dems at the earliest opportunity. When I started working with the health and care sector 33.5 years ago, broadly, my first area of work was to explore the impact of the care in the community reforms. Many similar initiatives over the years, including repeated organisational reshuffles, have changed nothing. The care sector today feels like Oliver asking for more on constant repeat. I therefore welcome policy paper 151 as a bold attempt to redraw that map. And I want to tell you that the sector is crying out for this vision. I've been working with senior managers and officers in local authorities and the NHS on integrated care boards to think similar thoughts to those in the policy paper. So I think the policy paper is right in its direction and ambition, But I just want to go to make 2 points to encourage us to go further and faster in implementation. First, on integration. As a member of Health Scrutiny on North Yorkshire, we receive regular updates from the Integrated Care Board, but as elected members, we know the day-to-day challenges of residents. We have only tokenistic and indirect involvement on Health Scrutiny. I respect and encourage our senior officers in the local authority to play their hand on these boards well, but it feels like they're there just because it's the right thing to do, to exert the sort of influence at the local level that would be necessary to transform the health and care sector by getting social care right. So I would therefore urge the implementation of this policy at a regional level to focus on the opportunities presented by those integrated care boards and by strengthening the hand of local democracy in that forum. And so I come to my second, further and faster, to get the workforce right. We need a plan not only for the home care workers, a brilliant plan, and care home assistants, but also for the existing professionals, such as social workers, community nurses and OTs, plus potential new roles, such as care navigators and community connectors, that we know make the difference to people's day-to-day experiences. Finally, one word of caution. In our ambition to bring the care sector into the spotlight and right decades of wrongs, we must remember that needing care is not an illness to be diagnosed. Care and community go hand in hand, and it's people who care and communities that bring life to years and years to life. So let's make sure we place equal emphasis on family carers and the community and voluntary sector in the implementation of this policy. Conference, please support this motion and the amendments and make caring society a key plank for our general election campaign. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Peter. Could I ask Mohsin Khan to stand by, and I now call Imogen Shepherd-Dubey. It looks like Imogen is not in the hall, in which case we will, at very short notice, call Mohsin Khan to speak now, and I'll ask Jill Hope to stand by.
Conference. When I was younger and a junior doctor in emergency departments or on stroke wards or elderly wards, I would see firsthand how delays and care problems affected patients and families. Not just longer stays, but uncertainty, difficulty for so many carers, patients, and healthcare professionals. Earlier this week, a study showed 1 in 12 inpatients are still in hospital because they are waiting for some sort of social care. 1 in 12. Social care is an essential service. It's not an optional add-on. It's as important as universal education or healthcare. You cannot have healthcare, properly universal healthcare, without universal social care. Anyone can need it, not just the old, and we should all have equitable access to it. The Tories have broken promise after promise. Labour are scared of offering any clarity on this. Only we, the Liberal Democrats, have a clear, brave message on social care. We're clear that we're expanding free personal care, as we saw in Scotland, based on Liberal Democrats in government there before. For too long, we as a society have separated dementia from, say, diabetes in how we help those who are afflicted by them. That might have worked in the 1940s, but it's not fit for 2023. We want to build on the Lib Dem Care Act that we again brought when we were in government. We want to empower people and how their care is delivered. We want to make sure that carers themselves, so vital, are cared for, and that unpaid carers, or those in education, or young carers are not forgotten, as they have been by so many other governments. This policy brings in a fair living wage and more for workers. It invests in skills, professionalisation and accreditation, and structured progression. It would add being an unpaid carer to the list of protected characteristics and build in yet further more rights for unpaid carers. When I sat on the Leaders Carers Commission, I heard firsthand how failures on policies in the past affect our unpaid and our young carers in such an unfair way. That's unacceptable. We would instead introduce guarantees around young carers, their education, and their childhoods. It's important that we don't forget people who have been forgotten for so long. These, conference, are Liberal Democrat policies to their core. As well as the vice chairs on the working group from FPC, I must thank all those who were involved with the working group, all those who gave evidence, both to the working group and the Carers Commission, and of course, our long-working headquarters staff. I'm proud that we have a paper that's very clearly liberal, that empowers people. That's fundamentally what Liberal Democrats stand for. Please back this and the amendments. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mohsin. Could I ask Kevin Langford to stand by? And I now call Jill Hope, and Jill will be speaking against lines 47 to 49 of the motion.
Liberal Democrats, this is the sort of motion we really love, isn't it? We're lovely, kind, caring people, and motions like this give us a warm glow. Yeah? Now get a grip, folks. We're in the real world, and we want to be taken seriously, and we want to get elected. Is this motion really a policy for the real world in every respect? I quote, "The right for employees to take at least 1 week's unpaid carers' leave each year." I've been a carer when my husband developed early onset Alzheimer's, and I know how hard carers work. In my case, with 4 children, a full-time job, and political commitments. If those carers, wives, husbands, daughters, sons, mothers and fathers, threw in the towel and refused to carry on, social care really would collapse. But as a qualified business advisor, I'm speaking against lines 47 to 49 because of the burden it would place on small business, SMEs, that employ so many people in the UK. SMEs are collapsing too, with the cost of living crisis, the hit on profits from lockdown, the challenge of hiring staff post-Brexit. If you run, for example, a pub or a restaurant, and some of your staff happen to be carers, a week or more of extra leave, even if unpaid, could seriously disrupt your business. From the carers' point of view, they so often live on a financial knife edge. What's the point of unpaid leave? This motion makes some wonderful suggestions, and broadly I support it, but those lines seem to have been dropped in casually without enough thought about the consequences. Agree the motion, conference, but I'd ask the movers to rethink those lines. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jill. Could I ask Claire Cape to stand by? And I now call Kevin Langford.
I support the motion, and with respect to the last speaker, I think it's something more than something that we all feel good about in the hall. I don't have a particular comment on the point she was raising, but the point I want to draw attention to is what I think is the most important part of it, which is proposal number 6, to introduce a long-term plan for the social care workforce. And of course to ensure that local authorities have got sufficient funds to resource this and make it happen. And I want to talk about this for two reasons. First, because as a member of the Working Party, which prepared the motion, the most convincing arguments I heard were from 2 managers of care homes. And they saw the central challenge of preparing decent care being to attract and retain and build the right working culture for the staff. And second, the second reason is because my father now in a care home, one of the biggest, perhaps the biggest thing that makes a difference daily is the attention he receives from the team there. So more through a process of neglect, I think, and lack of strategy than design, the government's put a 10-year squeeze on the finances of the care sector. And this has meant the sector doesn't pay staff well or, for the most part, provide good long-term career structure. Nobody voted for that. We just let it happen. And again, without really thinking about it, we've created a gulf between the terms and respect we sometimes give staff working in care homes and those we afford staff working in the NHS. This means the care sector has high staff turnover, very high levels of vacancies, and in some areas demotivated staff. So we need to introduce, as the motion proposes, a real living wage for care home staff. We need to improve career progression and accreditation. We need to replicate NHS bands for frontline workers across the care home sector. We need to create more cross-working across the NHS and the care sector. Social care and the NHS are 2 ends of the same spectrum. We shouldn't have social care workers and NHS workers. We should have healthcare workers delivering an overall healthcare service. For this and many other reasons too, support the motion.
Thank you very much, Kevin. Could I ask Piers Allen to stand by? And I now call Claire Cape.
Thank you. Good morning, conference. I've worked up my whole life in the NHS, and I've been recycled quite a few times as the system changes. I think it's about time the government got it right. At conference in spring 2018 in Southport, I had the honour of following Norman Lamb onto the stage. I spoke then in favour of the motion, the NHS at 70, emphasising the need for joined-up funding for health and social care. Conference, this winter, 5 years on, as the NHS approaches 75, we've seen the symptoms of a disconnected and underfunded whole system. Queuing ambulances and delays in ED will never be solved if we see these as a problem. Integration is key. Delays for people leaving hospital because of duplication and confusion in transferring their care to home, care homes, care services, and kinship carers that we've heard about this morning are the root of the problems. The Tories have failed to fix anything. Recently, a local resident in my ward needed portable oxygen so that he could visit outside his home during the precious last few weeks of his life. But the complexity of the relationships between his GP, the hospice, the community specialist doctor, and the commissioners, and the oxygen supplier meant that this didn't happen. It also meant that he needed transport to hospital for a pain management treatment instead of going by car. What an appalling experience for him and his family. What a waste. I welcome and support both amendments and both the drafting amendments. Innovative use of technology and data can and will enable better and more joined-up care and better outcomes if we use them. In the local integrated care board where I live, the health Select and the Health Select Committee on the Council, of which I'm a member, we're going to have a whole system inquiry day. We're going to look at the data and look at the stories and look at the experiences to really understand what's going on. I would really commend this approach to anyone else involved in the sector. And until the government invest in health and care workforce and the carers, nothing will be fixed. Conference, please vote in favour of the motion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Claire. Could I ask Claire Tyler to stand by, who'll be summating on Amendment 1, and I now call Piers Allen.
Good morning, Conference. I particularly want to talk in favour of Amendment 1, but of course the motion overall with the amendments. Just to remind you, it's utilising local partnerships to develop short-term stay, convalescence and rehabilitation provision in community hospitals or other transitional care centres. One of the issues we have with some of the perverse incentives government have put in just to help with the current discharge crisis is that a lot of patients are being sent to care homes without the rehabilitation packages that they really need to help them actually get home, where we often know they're going to thrive better in the long run. So we really do need to have local planning and partnerships to allow flexible use of resources to really ideally get rehabilitation started as they leave the acute hospital and maybe into the care home and then carry on at home. That will make a real difference to many in terms of keeping them safe at home when they get there. I want to particularly also welcome the great emphasis in the paper and in the motion on carers. One of the most transformative things we've done on my Health and Wellbeing Board is actually introduce the carers representative. She always speaks up at our Health and Wellbeing Boards, but more importantly, the thinking and thought goes into the reports that are written and strategies developed. And we've managed to replicate that on our partnership board. So again, we have a carers representative, and it really does make the difference in just having a text saying we care about carers to really making sure that their thoughts for our unpaid carers and family carers and kinship carers are really there. So I really ask you to support this motion and the amendments, and then really get behind and sell it come the campaign ahead of us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Piers. Could I ask Sam Al-Hamdani to stand by? And can I now call Baroness Claire Tyler, who will be summating on Amendment 1.
Thank you, and good morning, Conference. It's a real pleasure for me to be summating on Amendment 1, but I do just want to say that this whole motion is about matters very dear to my heart and that of my family. Now, whilst Amendment 1 is very largely about children's social care, and the motion mainly focuses on adults, I am absolutely delighted to support what hopefully will become another part of our party's wider strategy to stand up for the rights of carers of all kinds. Now, Daisy has already spoken earlier on about the Carers Leave Bill, which, along with Chris Fox, I am helping to co-steer through the House of Lords, and I hope it reaches the statute book soon. And I would just say, in response to some of the concerns that were raised there, that in talking to employers, they all saw unpaid carers leave as something that would help them retain staff, as well as helping those unpaid carers juggle their work and caring commitments. And Conference, last year I was also pleased to chair a House of Lords Select Committee looking at how the government has implemented the Children and Families Act 2014. And our report, which was published last December, highlighted how previous governments had completely overlooked the role of kinship care, focusing far more instead on adoption and foster care. And we did a visit, which I remember, to a family court, and we heard firsthand about how the lack of support for kinship carers was contributing, in some cases, to the breakdown of some kinship care placements. So our Select Committee report called on the government both to identify possible kinship carers earlier and, importantly, to extend employment leave to certain kinship carers. I'm so delighted that this amendment, the Munira's amendment, picks up on that latter recommendation and proposes extending support even further in the ways we've heard. Because conference kinship care, where wider family members or friends are raising children who are unable to live with their birth parents, these arrangements usually are born out of love, but can come at a huge sacrifice and cost to the friends and families involved. And that's why I think receiving weekly payments equal to the allowance that foster carers receive is so important. And I think Munira said this, it's not only the right thing to do, but I think it's cost effective too. If it costs over $72,000 to put a child into local authority care each year, when every child that goes into kinship care instead will save the taxpayer more than $35,000, even after the cost of the allowances factored in. I just think we can't afford to do nothing. To me, it simply seems like a win-win. Now, I was absolutely delighted that everyone who's spoken specifically about kinship care has been agreeable to this amendment. That's great. And I think what's so important for me, yes, social care, always seen as the sort of the Cinderella of our wider health and social care system, but frankly, children's social care is the Cinderella of the Cinderella, and that's why we're sort of talking about it today. And of course, there's so many other things I'd like to be doing in this area, other aspects of children's social care. There's foster homes, there's foster carers, children's homes, early support, family hubs, and all of that. But as Munira said at the beginning, the government's strategy for children's social care completely failed to grasp the scale of the crisis. It's ducked the big decisions and kicked them into the long grass. The review recommended $2 billion money going in, and the government's absolutely committed a fraction of that, saying that instead it will publish a national kinship care strategy at the end of 2023. Conference, we need actions, not words. There is so much more to do. Please support Amendment 1 and the motion as a whole.
Thank you very much, Claire. Could I ask Judith Jolly to stand by, and I now call Sam Al-Hamdani.
Thank you. Thank you, Conference. I'm summating on Amendment 2, although nobody's spoken against it, so it seems like that's a good idea. What I want to do is take a little bit of time to talk about, I'm a councillor in Oldham, and I know there's a lot of councillors here, and I know there's a lot of people who in their professional lives work in this area. Oldham is one of the most deprived places in the country, and in many ways it's one of the most deprived places in Europe. And it is brutal out there. And when you are a councillor or you are working in this area and you watch somebody fade away and you see somebody die and you know that their lives could and should have been better and they weren't. And that's what's not happening because we don't have this system. We don't have the care that we should be providing. And whether it's ours is a practical step about providing local services to transition out of acute care into the community. But every one of those steps means that that is an opportunity for someone to be able to live a better life than they would have done otherwise. And an opportunity for their family to live a better life than they would have been able to do otherwise. And no one would ever not care for somebody, but everybody deserves the opportunity to live the best life that they can, whether they are the person needing the care or the person who is having to give the care. So please, Conference, for all of those people, to make this country the place it should be, that we should be proud of, vote for the amendments, vote for the motion, go out there and change the world and get rid of this horrific government. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sam. And I now call Judith Jolly to summate on the motion as a whole.
Good morning, Conference. What a splendid debate. It's really good to be back together in person after nearly 4 years. We've had 3 Prime Ministers, 5 Health and Social Care Secretaries, and still no plan from the government to fix social care since we last met in 2019. Nearly 4 years ago, Boris Johnson gave his first speech as Prime Minister. On the steps of Downing Street, as Daisy reminded us, he said that we will fix the crisis in social care once and for all with a clear plan we have prepared. Like on so many other occasions, he was economical with the truth, or perhaps he just forgot. 4 years of Conservative government later, social care remains in crisis, with no meaningful plan from the government to fix it. They promised to introduce an £86,000 cap on care costs in 2021, but the Chancellor has now delayed this till 2025, kicking the can down the road for the next government to deal with. This will be 11 years after the Care Act introduced the provisions for a cap on costs, and nearly 15 years since the Dilnot report first recommended it. The government introduced a health and social care levy on national insurance to pay for social care, but the Conservatives couldn't even agree among themselves, and Liz Truss scrapped it as she went about crashing the economy. Now, Adam Smith said one of the principles of sound taxation is certainty. Conference, this government has given the country no certainty. There is no plan from the Conservatives to fix social care. And in this paper, we set out how the Lib Dems would do things differently. But it's not just fine words. The Liberal Democrats have a proud record of improving social care in government, in Scotland, and also in some local governments. And we also need to build a fairer society while we're about it. In Scotland, it was a Labour and a Liberal Democrat coalition government that made personal care free at the point of need. This meant that everyone, regardless of wealth, could have security and dignity at the end of their lives. We should rightly be proud of this legacy in government, but the SNP have run social care services into the ground by strangling local authorities and micromanaging services out of Holyrood. During the Westminster Coalition, Paul Burstow and Norman Lamb drew up the Care Act, landmark legislation that put the social care sector on the right path. After we left government, the Conservatives left care to wither on the vine, failing to implement many of the Act's provisions and failing properly to invest in the sector. Now, in local government, we are leading the way in areas and improving lives. In Somerset, the Liberal Democrat-run council has been investing in services, working with the NHS, providers, and the local community to ensure people get the care they need. This includes a 7-day-a-week service, including community agents who help to connect people with support from their own communities. Now, this paper sets out how we would build on those achievements. For a long time, Ed Davey has been championing the rights of unpaid carers, the unsung heroes that devote so much of their lives to looking after their loved ones. We would introduce free personal care, which would provide everyone with the support that they need to live independently for as long as they're able, a goal every Liberal should believe in. This is a proposal which draws support from right across the political spectrum. The Conservative Thatcherites, Lords Forsyth, has called for free personal care, as has Labour's John McDonnell. The evidence is clear and the moral argument compelling. We would invest in the skill of the social care workforce, who've been taken for granted by the Conservatives. Social care workers are poorly remunerated and held in lower esteem compared to those working in health. Earlier this year, Ed Davey called for care workers to receive a £2 uplift to the minimum wage. Care workers deserve a real living wage, one which keeps up with the costs of living and gives them the fair pay they deserve. We would introduce a decade-long programme working with providers, local government, the education sector and the unions to modernise and professionalise the social care workforce. This would include the creation of clear career paths, professional accreditation and development, and better paying conditions. Eventually, we would want a social care workforce comparable to healthcare, with the job security that esteem that entails. There is also a question of equality. Women make up 82% of the social care workforce, and ethnic minorities make up around a fifth. In improving the workforce, we will also be promoting wider equality in our society. We understand the benefits of localism. In Scotland, the SNP has increasingly centralised provision of everything, trying to run every service out of Holyrood. We know that that is not the right approach. I live in Cornwall. Cornwall's different from London, and services should reflect these different needs. Conference, I really would encourage you to support this motion and accept the amendments. Its proposals are built on policies we have enacted in government in Westminster and Scotland. The tried and tested liberal principles of localism, fairness and empowering individuals. It will give us security, dignity and a high quality of life in old age for those who, irrespective of their financial status, will benefit. Conference, please support this motion.
Thank you very much, Judith, and thank you to all speakers for a great debate. Apologies that we weren't able to call all speakers. We did have more cards than we were able to call. So we're now going to move to a series of votes. So we'll be voting first on Amendment 1, then on Amendment 2, and then on the motion as a whole. So those online should be able to see the vote now on My Voice. Could those in the hall please raise your cards if you support Amendment 1? Thank you very much. And could you raise your hand if you are against Amendment 1? Okay, I can't see any hands there, but we'll just check online as well. So we now move to voting on Amendment 2. Could all those in favour of Amendment 2 please raise your voting cards? Thank you. And those who are against, please raise your voting cards. Thank you very much. And we'll just check online. Okay, so that Amendment 2 is clearly carried. So we now move to the vote on the motion as amended. So for all those in favour of the motion, please raise your voting cards. Thank you. And all those against? Okay, we will just wait a little for the online vote. Bear with us. Okay, so that motion is clearly carried. I'd like to say thank you to my aides, Shafak Mohammed and Jenny Rigg. We are going to take a short pause now as we set up for the next item on the agenda.